Good evening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Wednesday Night Live. Today, what is live as well will be archived. So, it's both live and perpetual. Let's put it that way. How's that? Good. So, this weekend. Well, actually, I should begin with the timely thing, which is tonight. Tonight is actually a special happy birthday and a happy yahrzeit, you can say. It's the same individual. Some of you may know him. His name is Moses. Moshe Rabbeinu. So he was born and passed away on the same day, the 7th of Adar, which is tonight, tomorrow. You've heard of this man? Yes. So though none of us have met him physically, I guess, but he lives on. Until this day, we call him Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. And though we're talking now over 3,300 years ago, he's probably the most famous person in history, and definitely set into motion events that would impact the universe and civilization in so many different ways. First of all, on a simple level, as an author, this is a feat that no one will ever match, and that is the greatest bestseller. Remains tops the charts, that it's not even on the bestseller list, is the Bible. It sells more books every year, even today in 2012, than any other book, and accumulatively for sure, and more languages translated than any other book. And you could see it. You go on the subways, people reading little Bibles. It's just still part of existence, even though to the chagrin maybe of some of the Enlightenment 200 years ago, they thought by now there'd be no Bibles left. And the chagrin of many people who burn Bibles, it still remains the number one book. Mysteriously for many, they have no clue why. Some people consider it primitive and so on. But however you twist and turn it, it still captures the imagination. And who is the Torah associated with? Of course, God. But after God, Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe kibel Torah mit Sinai. Moses received the Torah at Sinai, became the first communicator and the first prophet of all that communicated this Torah. And as a matter of fact, the Torah is sometimes even called Torah's Moshe, which is a strange statement. Torah's Hashem. Could you call it the Torah of Moses, the Torah of God? Moses was just a conduit, was just a messenger. So the Medrash says, the interesting thing is, we say, Zichru Torah's Moshe Avdi. God says that Zichru will remember the Torah of Moshe because he gave his life for it. And someone who gives a life for something is considered as if he is the author of it. So essentially, the interesting irony here is because Moses was humble and completely dedicated his life to it, therefore you can call it in his name because he wasn't an individual of his own, he gave his life to God. And that's the reason that he could be associated with him. Had he been a big PR man or someone that is into his own name, they would never call the Torah with his name. It was because his name is so close and associated with God's name, because he dedicated his life entirely to God, to that extent. And there's actually an interesting law in the Torah. It says, we have to honor people who have taught us something. It says that even if you learn one word from somebody, you're supposed to honor them. That's why one of the customs is we stand up before a scholar or someone who's our teacher. You're not honoring the human being, you're honoring the wisdom, which is God's wisdom, that this person carries and conveyed to you. So it's like you're honoring and respecting something that is greater than yourself. But we don't worship human beings. There's an interesting distinction. It says that a king and a scholar both have to be honored for whatever the reason, each one for their own reason. A king, it says, if he forgoes and says, you don't have to honor me, you still have to give him honor. In other words, he cannot be moichel, he cannot forgo his own honor. If a Talmud Chacham, a scholar, says, that's all right, you don't have to honor me, you have to listen to him, and you don't have to give him that honor. In other words, if he says, please don't rise, you don't have to do so. For a king, even if he insists not that you don't honor him, you still have to do so. And the reason for this, interestingly, is because a king's honor is God's honor, and the king has no control over it. A wise person's honor, on the other hand, is also God's honor, but because it became his wisdom, so he owns it, in a sense that he can also forego and say he's become one with the wisdom. And therefore, for example, there's a concept where we have to teach. When we teach something, we should always say the name of the person we heard it. It says, "Emer davar b'shem Emrei." Someone says something, the name of someone, you bring redemption to the world. As Esther, when she spoke to Achashverosh, she spoke in the name of Mordechai. Yet we find many times that great scholars and sages didn't repeat things in the names of their teacher. And the reason is because once you own it, it becomes so much integrated in you that in a sense you control its power in a good way. So anyway, all this elaboration is about Moses, his birthday, and Yortzeit on the same day. Haman, who later, the archenemy of the Jewish people, made the mistake because when he threw lots and looking for the day to annihilate the Jews, the lots, he chose 7th of Adar because he said it's a good day for him because it's the day when Moses passed away. So he saw that as a bad omen for the Jews and a good day to kill them. And the Talmud says, but he didn't know it was also his birthday. And so if he had known it's his birthday, then you realize, besides the fact that a Yortzeit, even though it's sad at the time, but a Yortzeit also has, over the years, it's a day that we honor as a day when the soul goes on, it's a continuing journey. Once the pain is gone, the Moshe Rabbeinu, as I said, continues to live. So we dedicate this class and all classes to the great Moses, whose, as I said, his birthday and Yortzeit is the same day. And since I mentioned the word Zichru Torah, to remember, the theme of tonight's discussion is about memory. And that is for many reasons, but primarily because this weekend, the Shabbos before Purim, there's always an additional Torah portion read. Every Shabbat, there's 52 weeks in the year, corresponding 52 chapters in the Torah. So every Shabbat, every week has its corresponding chapter. Every chapter has 7 sections, corresponding to 7 days of the week of each of the 52 weeks. In effect, every day of the year has its respective Torah portion. But there are certain weeks where we read an additional Torah portion. We take out a second Torah scroll. And one of those weeks is this weekend. And we read the chapter called Zocher, to remember. Parshat Zocher. And therefore the Shabbos is called Shabbos Zocher, the Shabbos of memory. Now what memory is it referring to? It's actually referring to a memory of the archenemy of the Jewish people, Amalek, that the Torah talks about. And when the Jews were fragile and vulnerable right after they left Egypt, no one had the nerve to attack them except Amalek did. And he became the sworn enemy, like the Nazis of the time, of biblical times. So finally, the Torah says, you shall remember what Amalek did to you, forever and ever. And the Shabbos before Purim, because Haman actually was a descendant from Amalek, so it says before we actually honor it on Purim, the Shabbos before, we remember that which we will honor the Purim, which is next Thursday. So this is the technical reason for reading it. I've discussed this idea many times about why we remember what Amalek is. Briefly, I won't go over this. This is recorded, and you can always access it in the archives, the video archives, and I've written about it. Amalek is, in psychological terms, why he's such an arch enemy, is because Amalek is the same numerical value, the gematria. In Hebrew letters, every letter has numerical value. Aleph is 1, a Beis is 2, a Gimel is 3. So any Hebrew name, every Hebrew word has a number associated with it. Let's just take an example. Give me your Hebrew name. What's your Hebrew name?
Hirsch.
Hirsch. So Hirsch is a Hey is 5, Yud is 10, Reish is 200, so that's 215, and a Shin is 300, so that's 515. So that numerical value has corresponding names and words that are associated with it. It's one of the ways deeper ways of analyzing and interpreting Torah ideas on a general life. So that number 515 has some connection with you and your soul. Is the only one name you have? Hirsch? Tzvi Hirsch, perhaps? Hirschber. Okay. So the name Amalek also has that, and Amalek is the same gematria as the word Suffolk, which in Hebrew is doubt. So Suffolk is 60, and 40, and 80 is 140, and 100 is 240. So Amalek is 240. And what is Suffolk? Why is that Amalek Suffolk? Because Amalek represents the doubts that each of us are plagued with. So you may think, doubt? What's that? Such an arch enemy? You think an enemy is someone who wants to kill you, someone wants to attack you. Hatred, anger. We have many vices many forces in the world that are very destructive and dangerous. Doubt sounds so innocuous. It's not so good to have doubts, but if you think about it, doubt is a silent killer. Its power is not in the fact that it's so aggressive and so violent. Its power lies in the fact that it's so silent. When you're paralyzed by doubt, it can forever hold you back from doing anything in life. How many of us don't make a move because we have a doubt? And that's why there's an expression, Ein simcha ka'ataras hasfeikas. There's no joy like the joy of resolving doubts. So even making sometimes a wrong move may be better than being paralyzed and making no move. As they say, they say the greatest risk of all is taking no risk. Life makes choices. And that paralysis, precisely because it doesn't seem so aggressive or loud, can be quite significant. Now, of course, there are times that find the status quo. You're buying time, you're saving time. But if it ultimately is a force that paralyzes you, it takes its toll over the years, over the days, over the years that you do not make a move. Then it becomes increasingly difficult to make a move. And that's what Amalek did. When the Jews left Egypt, and they were passionate and excited, they had just seen God's hand. And they had, after so much suffering, so when you see salvation after suffering, it's a very high moment. And Amalek threw doubt into them. And the expression used, which we read on Shabbos, in this reading, it says, remember what Amalek did to you on the way out of Egypt. Asher karcha baderech. So the word karcha means, literally, he encountered you in the way. In other words, he went to war with you. Let's see how they translate it. How they surprised you on the road and cut off all the weak people at your rear when you were parched and weary, and they did not fear God. In other words, they took advantage of you. That's the technical interpretation. That they surprised you or they attacked you by surprise. And especially they preyed on the weak people who... But karcha also has another word in Hebrew which means coldness, numbness. When you're excited about something, you're anticipating, you're driven, and then the worst thing someone can do is just throw cold water on you and just say, don't be so excited. Don't think you can really change. Don't think there's any hope. That has more power than someone who is aggressively attacking you, because they kill you with the apathy. They kill you with indifference, which in some ways is more powerful than actually, at least someone's fighting with you. They say, what's worse, apathy or ignorance? And the guy says, I don't care, and I don't know, and I don't care. The I don't care, the apathy, in many ways is more destructive. And someone, at least you share with them an exciting idea, and they argue with you. Okay, there's a sign of life. But if they fall asleep on you and they yawn when you're about to share with them an earth-shattering experience, that is very, very damaging. Unless you fight it, of course. And that's what Amalek did. It's that type of throwing cold water, creating doubts, creating that type of paralysis. You're not so sure, and so on. And especially in times of when there's a need for a move, like if you're in the middle of a war, doubts and confusion and being paralyzed is equal to death. You have to make a move. You need a leader. You need someone that's going to make a move quickly and think clearly, and so on. So on this Shabbos we remember this, and it's connected to Purim. But the truth is that, as I said, I've discussed this theme many times, but the word zachar is the key word here. Memory, to remember. I thought of discussing this power of memory. On Shabbos we don't even say zachar Amalek, we say to remember. And of course zachar is a central theme in Judaism. We have Yizkar. For those of us who lost parents, parents passed away, so on Yom Kippur and other several times a year, we say Yizkar. Yizkar means to remember. So memory is a very powerful force in the human being. And I've discussed this as well, I believe, last year and previous years, different themes. I wanted to address something which I don't believe we've discussed, at least not elaborated upon. So as I said, I've discussed the idea of memory, why it's so powerful. It connects us to generations past. The enemies of the Jews always attacked. The first thing they always attacked when they came to a city was the tombstones of all things. Strange that they would attack cemeteries. Why is a cemetery a threat to them? No one there that can do anything to them. Because they sensed unconsciously, or subconsciously, that the power of Jews is their connection to the past. And in a sense, you destroy the tombstones. You destroy the link, in their mind at least. and they were correct about that. That's why we consider a place where we rest those bodies of souls that have departed as a holy, sacred ground. We consider we visit. We're not visiting the dead. We're visiting the spirit, which has been put to rest there. When we signed the Ma'aras HaMachpelah in Hebron, till this day they fight over the place where the patriarchs rested. One of the most powerful stories early in the Bible is when Abraham buys a plot for Sarah, which becomes Hebron, the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. So the power of memory is clear in the context, the cultural context, the historical context, and the religious context. But I wanted to discuss it more on a personal level, this issue called memory, how it works, because I think through looking at our own memories or a lack of memory or forgetfulness, it can shed light on in general us as human beings in general, and how we've shaped and how we work and how we function. And surprisingly, I think you could see when you look at memory as also a tool that is a critical component in relationships, in communication, and so on. And I'll make the case for it. So that's what I'm going to be discussing now. I can use myself as a personal specimen here, a kosher guinea pig, if you wish, because I would say maybe my high point in life is definitely being with you. But another high point was over the years. As some of you may know, I was what's called a chayzer and a maniach. These are Hebrew words in Hasidic lexicon that refer to someone who repeated. Chayzer means repeated. When the Rebbe would speak, the Pavitcher Rebbe spoke. So I was, for many years, one of the main writers and main people who reviewed and reconstructed what he said. Now this was not small feat because it was a Shabbos and holidays, many of these talks. And on Shabbos and holidays, no tape recorders were used, and no notes were taken. So then how exactly did it get published? You may wonder. Well, it wasn't a magic. It was simply a few people, myself included. As I said, I was the primary person in this team. That we remembered hours of these talks, and then with our good old brains, then after Shabbos, we put it down on paper, committed to paper, and then had it published. I had the honor to do this from the years 1979 through 1992, when the Rebbe suffered a stroke and was unable to speak after that. So I published probably over 1,000 of his talks. Many of them, as I said, were delivered on Shabbos and holidays. And people always wonder and ask me, how did you do that? So I'm here to share some memory tips tonight. So I will talk, and I can speak from personal experience. It's absolutely definitely a unique element, because who does such a thing today? Why would anyone need to do it? With modern technology, we record things, we take notes, and there's no necessity to just memorize. Even though, frankly, if I had it my way and I was involved in the education process, based on my experience, what I've learned through doing this, I would make it absolutely incumbent on every student, every one of us, to memorize, because it actually changes the way you think and changes who you are as a human being. And in many ways, I can't even know how I would be had I not done this. So, interestingly, the Shabbos rules of not taking notes and tape recorder compelled us to use our minds in ways that we would never have used had we relied on technology. And trust me, the talks that were delivered in the weekday, which I recorded on tape, I don't remember, and because I relied on the machine. And here we had to rely on this machine here. So I have a few key. I have some experience and insights that I could share with you, and I have the credibility because I've done it. So Zachar to me is personally close to my heart. It's not necessarily about Amalek. I happen to remember good things, not just about Amalek. But as you'll see, memory is a powerful, powerful force. And of course, on a very basic level, we all ask this question. And there's some best-selling books or there's seminars and talks, and it always attracts someone's attention when you get in your inbox, tricks, tips from memory tips to remember names, remember experiences, and so on. So it's interesting. What exactly is memory, and why does it fade? And why are there things? I could turn around this room here. Guarantee that every one of you has at least one, if not many more, memories that will never die. Things that you remember just as if they happened today. I mean, you're not always conscious of it, but it's very easy to retrieve. And then there are things that seemingly are important that you simply can't recall. Things you've heard, things you experience, and so on. But there are things that all of us have that are always part of you. And sometimes they're so part of you that it's inseparable. You can't even erase it from your memory if you wanted to. Unfortunately, sometimes they're not such good memories. They can be haunting ones. So the question is, why do some things remain etched in our psyches and some things are not? So the obvious answer that any intelligent person would say, that if it's a memory of something that happened earlier in your life, your formative years, or a very traumatic experience, a very powerful experience, those things don't go away so quickly. But the question is why? Okay, so the obvious reason again would be because it was so significant, it like etched itself inside of you, and it's not just something that would not really become integrated. So you may, yesterday or tonight or last week, you may have heard a very powerful speech. You may have read something. You may have experienced something that you wanted to retain, and then you can't really recall it a week later. The reason is not because it wasn't important, but it didn't have that integrative element that a very traumatic or very powerful or very young experience has. That would be the basic reason that most of us would say why certain things we retain and certain things we don't retain. But the question is this: is there something we can do to turn that switch on? Is there some ingredient that we can do to actually initiate or retrieve certain memories that we want to retrieve, and actually lock away or maybe erase and delete some memories we don't want to remember? That would be pretty neat, because unfortunately, often when we're in a crisis or we're in a situation where talk about paralysis and doubts, suddenly you're in a place and all the memories of all your failures or all possible failures come into being, and you wish at that time that you didn't remember everything, because then you'd be able to perhaps move forward. So memory, as you see, talks a lot more than just about remembering names or phone numbers and stuff like that. It has much more broader context. And I'd like to talk about that in more depth and so on. And go away with actual tips and exercises that each of us can do. And I believe that if we think about this, it will illuminate a part of your life in a way you probably never have looked at quite this way. And that let's put it perhaps in this context, in the context of something we would not usually associate with memory. Let's associate with another question. Not just how good is your memory. Let me ask you a different question. How good of a listener are you? And we don't have to raise our hands. Usually when I ask this question, around half the room says they're good listeners, half not. That's usually and then at the end of the evening, nobody raises their hand. It depends how you define what a listener is. Some people think they're great listeners, and they're terrible listeners. One thing you can know for sure, it's very hard to be your own judge, obviously. It's because it's not you can determine if you're a good listener, it's the one that's speaking to you that can determine. So if you're going to say, listen, to everyone that speaks to you, I'm a good listener, and everyone that speaks to you says you're not, you can rest assured that they're correct, because they're the ones that are doing the speaking. So listening is about really listening to something and listening to someone. So that's number one. So the fact that you say you're a good listener or you think you're a good listener doesn't necessarily mean, and I'm not trying to be harsh or negative, it's just being honest. To be honest. So what is the definition of really listening? And as you'll see, listening and memory go hand in hand. They're almost the same thing, actually. So, a few more questions before I get into the nitty-gritty of the topic about this thing called memory. Who remembers things best as a group? Children remember things best as a group. Now, which is odd as well. Why is that odd? Because memory is definitely a faculty of the intellect. Children clearly have less developed intellect than adults do. We see this in many ways. Adults can concentrate more, adults can abstract, children can be more emotional and not really be able to just separate themselves from the experience, etc., etc. And yet, the things that happen to us in our childhood, stories or songs, things we learn, remain there forever. Simple example, try teaching a 20-year-old ABC. Almost impossible. Most of us have learned ABC when we were far younger, so we can't really test it. Why is it almost impossible? Because ABC is so meaningless that a 20-year-old will question, why am I learning this? And they won't have patience for it. A child, a child is told, okay, well, let's learn A, and it becomes almost like a game. A, B, C, D. At the time, the child doesn't even know why it's learning ABC. The teacher knows, supposed to know. And that's because you learn letters. Letters turn into words. Words turn into phrases, sentences, paragraphs. Paragraphs turn into chapters. And that's how ideas are communicated. Without the ABCs, you wouldn't be able to get there. So we start teaching that to an adult, it's extremely difficult. I'm not talking about teaching a new language. A new language, sometimes you find that some people pick them up quickly. But even a new language, frankly, why is it, for example, any language that you pick up after you're 13, 14, you'll have an accent? And a little right before that you don't. Because there's something where it's still, just like a child's bones are more resilient and more flexible, their psyche is also more resilient and more flexible. So they can easily adjust, and they learn things, they adapt them, they absorb them. So the key point here is that a child absorbs like a dry sponge. Precisely because it's a clean slate, a tabula rasa, a clean slate, the child does not yet have ideas developed, that's why you can retain so well. So basically, as the hard drive gets filled up, it gets harder to retain well. Because you have now context. And context, in a bizarre way, is what actually disturbs the memory process. I'm going to elaborate some more on this in a few minutes. So when you look at children, because they have yet to develop ideas, and they're also even their physical brains have not yet developed consciously ideas and a method of thinking, that's why they're easily able to absorb like a dry sponge. We're no longer dry sponges as adults. Our sponge is wet.
Scattamo stanotti, viri come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Gira musica, gira e non si ferma, come una galla do vento aita. Attira con narina, tamburello e abbacia come sua figliola. Scattamo stanotti, viri come balla, sotto e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Sinni e tunu, i voti si danno, tu na poco gli peputia. Sinda fettunu, i cappotti russi e si ricordano da notti buona. Scattamo stanotti, vini come balla, su te fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Balla